Welcome to part 15 of our series on building a Zelda-like game in Phaser 3. In this video, we'll add a life component to manage health for both the player and enemies. We'll also implement a death state to handle what happens when health reaches 0. If you're new here, this is part of a full series where we create a Zelda-inspired game from scratch. Check out the playlist link in the description to start from the beginning. Alright, let's dive in and add health mechanics. With our new collision logic in place, we'll now work on adding a life component, which will keep track of our player and our enemy's max health as well as their current health. As we take damage, we'll update our life component, and once we eventually reach 0, we'll mark our character as destroyed, and then we'll transition to a new death state that we'll create. To get started, let's make a new life component. So under our components, under game object, let's make a new file. We'll do life component. Let's open up our speed component. We'll copy our logic from here. We'll paste it over here. Let's do life component. Now for our class, we'll do max life and current life for our properties. Let's update our constructor, and so we'll pass in max life, and that'll be a number, and then we'll have current life, and we'll make this be optional, and we'll set it by default to our max life. Now we'll update our properties, so we'll do this.max life will be equal to our max life, and then we'll do this.current life will be equal to our current life. Now we'll add our getters, and so first we'll do a get for life, so now we'll update our getter. So we'll do get life. This will return our current life. And now we'll get our max life. This will return a number. And so we'll return this.max life. Finally, we'll want to add a public method for when we want to take damage. And so we'll do public take damage. For this method, we'll have one argument, damage. And this will be the amount of damage that we're taking. And so this will be a number. For this method, we won't return anything. And so first, we'll just add a safeguard. So if our current life is already at 0, then we won't do anything and we'll just return early. Otherwise, we'll update our current life, and so we'll do this.current life. We'll subtract the damage that we've taken, and now let's add another safeguard where if we're below 0, then we'll reset our health back to 0. Now that we have our new life component, let's add this to our game objects. So let's open up our base character class. For our character configuration, let's add in 2 new properties. We'll do our max life. We'll expect this to be required, it'll be a number. And then we'll have our current life, and we'll make this optional. Then down on our properties, let's add a new property for our new component. So we'll do protected, we'll do our life component. And now down in our configuration, let's grab those 2 properties. So we'll have max life, and then we'll have current life. Now let's create our new component, and so we'll do this. We'll do our life component, will be equal to a new life component. Pass in our game object, we'll pass in max life, and then we'll pass in current life. So one other property we're going to add to our class is we're going to add a property to keep track if our game object is defeated or not. So we'll add a new protected property. We'll do is defeated. This will be a Boolean. And by default, we'll set this to false. And so down here in our general configuration, we'll do this is defeated, and we'll do false. Well, now we're going to add a getter to allow us to return that property. So we'll do get is defeated. We'll return a Boolean, and we're just going to return this is defeated. So now that we have our new component, let's update our hit method on our class. So first thing we'll do is we're going to check to see if we're already defeated. If we are, we won't do anything. So we'll do if this is defeated, we can return early. If we're not defeated, then we'll check it to see if we're invulnerable. And then finally, before we do set our state here, we're going to go ahead and update our life component. So we'll do this, we'll do our life component, and we'll do take damage. It's time to provide the damage we'll take, so let's make a new variable, do damage, and then we're going to pass this in through our method as an argument. So we'll do damage, and this will be a number. So now after we take our damage, we're going to check to see if it's at 0, and if it is, we're going to update is defeated to be true, and then we'll switch to our new state for our death state. So if our life component, if our life is currently set to 0, we'll do this is defeated, set equal to true. And now we'll set our state. So let's copy this here. And then we'll go ahead and return early. So let's go ahead and define our new state. So we'll go into character states. I'm going to copy this here. And we'll do death state. We'll come back to our character game object. And now we'll just update our state name. So before we define our new death state, we're going to add 2 new methods to our class. So once our character dies in our game, we'll want to hide our game object from our game scene. We'll also want to make it not active, and so that way we'll stop running our update method on our game object. To do this, we're going to add a new method for disabling our object. So we'll do public, we'll do disable object. So when we call this method, first we're going to disable our physics body so we stop triggering our collisions. And so we'll do this, we'll do our body, we're going to do as phaser.physics our arcade, and then our body. Now we'll do enable, and we're going to set this equal to be false. Now we want to make our game object not active, and so we'll do this.active, set equal to false, and we also want to make our game object not visible. One other change we'll do is if we are our player, we're going to have our player stay visible on our screen, but we won't have our game object be active. And by doing this, this will allow us to have our player be on our screen once we transition to our game over scene. And so we'll do if we are not the player, then we want to hide the game object once we disable it. So one other method we're going to add is we're going to add a method to enable our game objects, and it's going to do the inverse of this. And so we're going to do public, we'll do enable object. We won't return anything, and so first we're going to see if our game object is defeated, and so if it is defeated, then we don't want to run any of our logic here. If the enemy is not defeated, now we want to go ahead and enable our physics body, and then make it active and visible. So let's copy this here, we'll go ahead and paste it, and we'll copy those 2 lines of code, and then let's go ahead and do our updates. So now we want to enable our body, and we want to make our game object active and visible. One last change we want to do before we do our death state is now we need to update our enemy and our player classes to pass in our new configuration for our health. To do this, let's go into our config file first, and we're going to define new properties for our health. So I'm going to copy this line here, we'll go ahead and paste it, and so we'll do player, and we'll do start max health, and we'll start our player off at 6 health. Let's copy this, and then we'll add that for our wisp and for our spider. And so for our enemy wisp, we'll set our max health to be 1. And for our enemy spider, we'll start our max health off at 2. So now, if we open up our player class, alright, so for our player class on our player config, this is where we'll add in our new properties for our max life and current life. So for max life, this will be a number, and then current life, this will also be a number. Alright, so we're adding these properties on our player config instead of passing them through directly on our configuration here. So then that way when we create our player instance, we can pass through our current health. By doing this, later on, if we add in support from able to save and load our game, we'll be able to store how much health our player currently has, and then when we create our player instance after we load our game, we can pass that through. So now if we jump over to our game scene, we'll update our player properties, and so we'll go to our player for our config, let's do our max life, and here we'll do our player start max health, and we'll set the same thing for our current health for the time being. So now that we've passed through our information, we need to pass that through to our super call, and so we'll do our max life, we'll grab that from our configuration, so we'll have our max life, and then we'll have our current life, and we'll do our config and our current life. Next, let's jump over to our spider class. So now for our spider, here we'll just pass it through right on our super configuration, and so we'll do our max life, and we're going to grab our enemy, spider, and then our max health. Let's do the same thing for our wisp. Alright, now if we jump back to our game scene, we just need to update where we call hit, and for the time being, we're just going to pass through 1 for the damage we're going to receive. With our updates for our life component in place, let's create a new state for our death state. So under our folder, let's go to our states and we'll make a new file. So under states character, we'll do death state. Let's go into our idle state. I'm going to copy our logic from here. We'll go into our death state. Let's update our class name. We'll update our character state reference, and we'll have our death state. Let's get rid of our onUpdate method. Alright, so for our death state, when onEnter is called, first we'll reset our body's velocity. After we do that, we're going to make our game object invulnerable so we'll stop taking damage. So let's do this. We'll do our game object. Let's grab our invulnerable component. We'll set invulnerable to equal to true. Next, we'll want to disable our body, so then that way we stop all collisions. And so let's reference our this. We'll grab our game object, our body. We'll do as our phaser physics arcade body. We'll call enable, and we're going to set this to be false. And after we do those updates, now we want to play our animation for our character dying. And so we'll do this. We'll do our game object, grab our animation component. We'll do play animation. For animation, we'll do our character animations, and we'll do die down by default. So no matter what direction our character was facing before, we'll have our animation play our down animation. And then finally, after our animation is finished, now we'll want to disable our game object and then provide a callback to run any additional logic we need to do in our game. For this, we'll make a new method on our class. We'll do this, and we'll do trigger defeated event. We'll add that new private method. For this method, we won't return anything. And so now we'll reference our game object, and we'll do disable object. Alright, so for our death state, we're going to add in one more property, and this is going to be an optional property for a callback to be invoked once our game object is defeated. This callback will allow us to run custom business logic, like what we do in our hurt state when we play our animation to have our player flash. So to add this callback, we'll make a new private property. We'll do onDie callback. For this, we'll just have a function that returns void. Now in our constructor, we'll make this optional, and so we'll do onDie callback. So for our type, and now we'll set our default value, and we'll have it return undefined. So now we can set that property. So we'll do this, onDie callback will be equal to our onDie callback. And now we can trigger that callback down here. And now we'll save. Now that we have our new state, let's go into our player class and we'll create our new instance of our state. So on our state machine, let's add in this. We'll do our state machine. Let's do add state. We're going to do a new death state. And we'll pass in our game object for reference. And now we want to define our animations for dying. So let's copy this logic here. So we'll have our 4 hurt keys. We'll paste them. And now we'll do die down. And now we just update our references. And so we'll have die. And then we'll have up, left, and right. Now for our player animation keys, we'll have die up. And then we'll have die side. For this animation, we don't want it to repeat. And then we'll keep ignore if playing is set to true. Next, let's do our spider class. So for our spider class, let's start with our animation configuration. Let's copy this here. We'll paste it. And now we'll have a special config for our death. And so we'll do death anim config. And for our spider animation keys, we'll do death. We don't want this to repeat. Now let's copy our logic here for our keys. And now we'll do die down, up, left, and right. Let's update our configuration reference. And now let's go down to our state machine and we'll add in our new state. So we'll do this, our state machine. Let's do add state. And we'll do a new test state. And we'll pass in this for our configuration. One last thing we need to do is now we need to create our death animation. So in our asset keys, we have a custom sprite sheet for our death animation that all of our enemy game objects will be able to use. So down in our create animations method, let's do this. We're going to do anims, we'll do create, and now we're going to provide our animation configuration. So this is just using a standard sprite sheet, and so that's why we're using a different method here. So for our sprite sheet, first we need to provide our key of our asset, and so this is going to be our enemy death, which will point to our sprite sheet. Now we need to do our frames that we want to use for our animation. And for this, we're going to use a utility method for generating our frame information. We're going to do this. We're going to do anims to reference our animation manager. And now we're going to do generate frame numbers. Now we can provide our asset key that we want to use, and we'll do enemy death. All right, so what this utility method is going to do is this is going to generate all of our frame numbers based on our sprite sheet we provide. And so for our default configuration, it's going to use every single frame in our sprite sheet. And so by doing this, if we open up our sprite sheet real quick, so if we go into our images, if we go under enemies and enemy death, it's going to create an animation using these 4 frames here. So after we provide our frames, next we need to do our frame rate. We'll set this to be 6, and we don't want this to repeat, so we'll do 0, and we won't have a delay, so we'll do 0. So now with all of our changes, we should be able to test our code. So if we have our player run into our spider should take damage. And now when we run over our spider one more time, our spider dies and we play our animation to have our spider disappear. And now we can still see their physics bodies around, but if we try to interact with it, we'll see that's disabled and our player's not taking damage. So now, if we go over to our configuration real quick, let's update our player's health to be 1. So now if we have our player run into one of our enemies, we should see our player plays our death animation, and now our player gets disabled and we stop colliding with our player. Alright, so let's revert our player's health back to 6, and we'll go ahead and save. That's it for this part of the series. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you're following along, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions or want to share your progress, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.